My name is Claire Ashton. I'm 41. And 6 months ago, a collection agency called me about a debt I did not know existed. Not a small debt. Not the kind of thing that accumulates from a forgotten subscription or an overlooked medical bill. A business loan default. $167,000. Outstanding on a loan that had been taken out 4 years earlier by my brother's food distribution company, a company I had known about, a company I had watched my brother build with the specific enthusiastic confidence he brings to every venture he undertakes, a company that had, approximately 18 months before the collection agency called me, quietly closed its doors when the revenue that had been projected and the revenue that had actually materialized turned out to be, in my brother's own eventual description, significantly different things. I knew the company had closed. I had not known about the loan. I had not known that the loan had a personal guarantee attached to it. And I had not known, in the most specific and consequential sense, that the personal guarantee on that loan had been signed in my name. Not by me. Not with my knowledge. Not with my consent. Signed, in the way that things are sometimes signed when someone believes they are solving a problem and does not fully think through what solving a problem in someone else's name actually means. Before I tell you what happened when I confronted my brother, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Only if this story is landing somewhere real. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back. I need to tell you about my brother, Daniel Ashton, before I tell you about the guarantee. Because Daniel is the center of this story and because understanding him is essential to understanding both how the guarantee happened and how the conversation about it eventually resolved, in the specific imperfect way that resolutions in real families tend to resolve, which is to say not cleanly, not fully, but honestly, and with something intact on the other side that was not intact before. Daniel is 3 years older than me. He is 44 now. And he is, in the way that some people simply are, someone for whom the world has always appeared to contain more possibility than it actually contains, not as a delusion exactly, not as a failure of intelligence, but as a specific quality of vision that sees the upside of every situation more vividly than it sees the risk. He has started 4 businesses across his adult life. The first was a landscaping company at 26 that grew to 12 employees and then contracted to 4 when he lost a significant commercial contract and did not have the capital reserves to sustain the overhead during the gap between losing the old contract and finding a new one. The second was a sports equipment retail operation at 31 that lasted 3 years and ended when a national chain opened 3 blocks away, and the specific advantage Daniel had been competing on, personal relationships and service, turned out to be insufficient to offset the price differential the chain could offer. The third was a consulting practice for small food businesses at 35. Helping restaurants and food producers navigate distribution and logistics, which produced modest income for 2 years and dissolved when the 2 largest clients moved in-house. And then the fourth. Ashton Food Distribution, LLC. A company Daniel started at 39, building on what he had learned from the consulting work, distributing specialty food products to independent grocery stores and high-end restaurants in the metropolitan area. He came to me when he was starting it. Not to ask for money. To tell me about it, in the specific animated way he describes everything he is beginning, the way that makes you feel the possibility of the thing before you have thought carefully about the probability of the thing. I listened. I asked questions. I said the things I always say to Daniel when he is starting something, which are versions of this: sounds exciting, and what does the revenue model look like? And have you stress-tested the projections questions that he answers with the specific optimistic fluency of someone who has thought carefully about the best-case scenario and less carefully about the worst, did not invest in Ashton Food Distribution? I want to say that clearly because it matters to what happened later. Daniel did not ask me to invest, and I did not offer to. Our relationship, around his business ventures, had arrived at a specific equilibrium across the 4 iterations that preceded this one, which was that I supported him emotionally and asked good questions and did not put my own money into things I could not fully evaluate. That equilibrium had served us both reasonably well. Or so I believed. The business launched. Daniel had secured a line of credit from a regional bank. He had 3 clients in the first month, 7 by the end of the third, 14 by the end of the first year. The numbers he shared with me in the periodic updates he gave, because he knew I was interested and because sharing progress with me was something he liked to do, sounded like growth. They sounded like the trajectory that makes a business viable. What I did not know, and what I would not find out until the collection agency called, was that the line of credit from the regional bank had been supplemented, in the business's second year, by an additional business loan from a different lender, a non-bank financial institution that provides capital to small businesses that have been operating for at least a year and that have revenue but that are not yet at the credit quality level that traditional banks prefer for larger lending. The additional loan was for $200,000. It was structured as a term loan with a 36-month repayment period. And it required, as loans of this type often do, a personal guarantee from the business owner. Daniel was the business owner. Daniel's name was on the guarantee. But Daniel's name was also on the loan documentation as the primary borrower, and the lender, as is standard practice for loans of this size and type, had also required a cosigner with stronger credit and a stable income source as additional security for the loan. Daniel had put my name on the cosigner line. Want to be as precise as I can about what this means, because I think the precision matters. A cosigner on a business loan is not a passive reference. A cosigner is a person who has agreed, in writing, to be equally responsible for repayment of the loan if the primary borrower defaults. A cosigner's credit is checked. A cosigner's income and assets are evaluated. A cosigner's financial standing becomes, from the moment the document is signed, part of the loan's security structure. And a personal guarantee, which this loan also required, is a document that states that the guarantor, the person signing it, agrees to repay the loan from personal assets if the business cannot. Daniel had signed both of these documents in his own name and also, on the cosigner and co-guarantor lines, in mine. I did not know this. I had not been present for the signing. I had not been asked. I had not reviewed the documents. I had not received copies. There was nothing in my files, my email, my possession, that suggested any connection between my name and a $200,000 business loan taken out by my brother's distribution company. Until a collection agency called on a Wednesday afternoon and told me that as a cosigner and co-guarantor on a defaulted business loan, I owed $167,000, which was the outstanding balance plus fees and accrued interest. Want to tell you what I did in the hours immediately following that call, because the sequence of my immediate responses tells you something about how I handle things that are large and unexpected, which is that I slow down before I react, I gather information before I conclude, and I make sure I understand the complete picture before I decide what to do about it. These are qualities I developed in my professional life. I am a contracts attorney. I have spent 15 years reading documents carefully and identifying exactly where the obligations lie and what they actually mean. Those 15 years of professional habit were the thing I reached for in the hours after the collection agency called, because reaching for the professional habit was the thing that kept me from making a call I was not yet ready to make, requested, from the collection agency, all documentation related to the loan and the guarantee. They were legally required to provide it. I gave them an email address, and I received, within 24 hours, a package of documents that included the original loan agreement, the personal guarantee, and the cosigner documentation. I read every page. And when I reached the signature pages, I saw my name. Printed clearly. Signed in handwriting that was not my handwriting. And beside my printed name, in a field that was supposed to contain the signatory's printed information, the last 4 digits of a social security number that was mine, set the documents down. I made myself a cup of tea. I drank half of it. Then I called my husband, Philip, who listened to the full situation without interrupting and who said, at the end, "What do you need from me right now?" I said, "I need you to be here when I call Daniel." He said, "I'll be home in 20 minutes. I called Daniel that evening. Philip sat across the table from me. I had the documents in front of me, specifically the signature page, because I wanted to be able to describe precisely what I was looking at when I asked the question. I said, "Daniel, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to tell me the exact truth." He said, "Of course." I said, "Did you take out a business loan in the second year of Ashton Food Distribution from a lender called Capital Bridge Financial?" There was a pause. Short but specific. Then he said, "Yes." I said, "Was there a cosigner requirement on that loan?" Another pause. Longer. He said, "Yes." I said, "Whose name is on the cosigner line?" Silence. Not the silence of someone working out how to describe something. The silence of someone who has been carrying something and who has just had it asked out loud for the first time. He said, "Claire." I said, "Is it your handwriting?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Did I consent to being on that loan?" He said, "No." I said, "Did I know about it?" He said, "No." I said, "Okay." I said it quietly. Not angrily. With the specific compressed focus of someone who is holding something large and is not going to let it become something uncontrolled. I said, "I am going to ask you one more question, and I need you to answer it as honestly as you can. Did you know, when you signed my name, that what you were doing was wrong?" A long pause. Then he said, "Yes." I said, "Why did you do it?" He said, "Because I needed the loan and I didn't have the credit quality they required for a cosigner, and you did, and I was afraid to ask you because I thought you'd say no, and I thought the business was going to work, and I thought if it worked it would never matter." I said, "But it didn't work." He said, "No." I said, "And now a collection agency is calling me for $167,000 with my name on documents I never signed." He said, "Yes." He said it the way people say yes when yes is the most difficult syllable they have ever produced. I said, "I'm going to need some time." He said, "I know." I said, "I'm also going to need a lawyer." He said, "I know." I said, "I'll be in touch." And I ended the call. I want to tell you about the specific quality of anger I felt in the days that followed, because I think being honest about it matters, and because the anger was real and I do not want to smooth it over with the resolution that eventually arrived. The anger was not the hot, immediate kind. It was the cold, specific kind. The kind that comes from having read the documents carefully and understood precisely what had been done and understanding that the person who did it had made a series of deliberate choices, each one requiring an active decision, that culminated in a signature in my name on a $200,000 loan. Choosing to apply for the loan. Choosing not to tell me about it. Choosing to put my name on the cosigner line. choosing to sign my name, choosing to submit the documents with my social security number. These were not accidental. They were not oversights. They were decisions, made one after another, by someone who knew each one was wrong and made them anyway because the alternative was asking me and risking that I would say no. Retained an attorney. Not Catherine Park, who had helped me with the insurance situation in a previous story on this channel, but a different one, a litigator named James Reeves who had specific experience in fraud and identity-related financial claims. I told him the full situation. He read the documents. He confirmed what I already knew, which is that what Daniel had done had a specific legal name. Forgery. Identity fraud. The use of another person's identifying information, including a social security number, to enter a financial obligation without their consent. These are serious things. They have serious legal consequences. And James was very clear that I had the right to pursue those consequences fully, both against my brother personally and potentially against the lender, who had a responsibility to verify the cosigner's actual consent during the loan origination process. Also said something that I want to share because I think it captures something important about the position I was in. He said, "Claire, you have a strong legal position. What I need to understand before I advise you on how to proceed is what you actually want. Not what you are entitled to. What you want. And those are not necessarily the same thing." I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You can pursue this aggressively and potentially have the debt removed from your responsibility and have your brother face serious legal consequences. You can pursue a negotiated resolution that addresses the debt without the most serious consequences. Or you can pursue something in between. What I cannot tell you is which of those you want. That is yours to decide." I spent a week deciding. Philip and I talked about it across several evenings, not urgently but seriously, the way we talk about things that have no clean answer. I talked to my therapist, who asked me the same question James had asked in different words, which was what outcome I could live with in 5 years. Not what felt justified right now. What I could live with in 5 years, when the acute anger had settled and what remained was the long-term shape of whatever I decided. Want to tell you what I decided and why, because I think the reasoning matters more than the specific outcome. Decided not to pursue criminal charges against Daniel. I want to be clear that this was not because what he did not warrant them. It did. Legally, precisely, it did. I decided not to pursue them because Daniel is my brother. Because he is 44 years old and because a criminal record for forgery and identity fraud would follow him for the rest of his life, and because, as much as I was furious and as much as I had every right to be furious, I was not able to make the decision that would produce that consequence for someone I had grown up with and who I believed, underneath the specific failures of judgment that had produced this situation, genuinely loved me even while doing something that had caused me real harm. What I decided to pursue instead was a civil resolution. James negotiated with the lender on my behalf. The lender, when confronted with evidence that the cosigner's signature had been forged and that my social security number had been used without my consent, had a problem of its own, because the loan origination process had failed to adequately verify the cosigner's actual consent, which meant the lender bore some responsibility for what had happened. James used that responsibility as leverage. The eventual resolution removed my name from the cosigner and co-guarantor obligations in exchange for a formal acknowledgement of the documentation failure and a release of any claim against me personally. The loan balance remained Daniel's obligation. Daniel's obligation, at $167,000 plus ongoing accrual, is not something he can easily satisfy. He is working through a debt repayment arrangement with the collection agency. It will take years. I am not involved in that arrangement, and I do not expect to be. What I am involved in is the conversation I had with Daniel, in person, 6 weeks after the legal resolution was complete. That was the hardest conversation of my adult life and the one I think about most when I think about what this situation ultimately produced. Met at a coffee shop. Neutral ground. I had asked him to come to me, and he had, which I noted because it was a small thing and it mattered. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him. He had the specific look of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time and has not been sleeping well. I sat across from him, and I looked at him for a moment before I started, because I wanted to have a clear picture of who was in front of me rather than the abstraction of what he had done. Said, "Daniel, I want to tell you what this cost me. Not what the legal situation cost me, though that was real. What the specific knowledge of what you did cost me." He said, "Tell me." I said, "I have spent 6 months understanding that someone I trusted with my identity, not just as a legal matter but as a fundamental fact about who I am and what my name means, chose to use that identity without my knowledge to avoid a difficult conversation." I said, "You knew that asking me and having me say no was a possibility. So instead of accepting that possibility, you removed my ability to say anything at all. And you signed my name." He was looking at the table. I said, "Look at me." He looked up. I said, "Do you understand what that was?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Tell me what it was." He said, "It was using you. It was treating your name and your credit and your identity as a resource I could access without asking because asking might have meant losing access to it." He said, "It was wrong, Claire. Not complicated wrong. Just wrong." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry." I said, "I know." He said, "Not in a way that covers it." I know it doesn't cover it. I said, "No. It doesn't. But it's what you have to offer, and I believe it's real, so I'm going to hold it for what it is." He talked for another hour. About his life, about the business, about what comes next for him. About our parents, who did not know the full picture and who I had decided did not need to know it in the way that I knew it. About what the relationship looks like now, which is something neither of us could fully answer but both of us were willing to try to figure out rather than foreclose on. Said, at the end of it, that he had thought about this situation every day for 6 months. Not because of the legal consequences to him, though those were real. But because of what it had required him to understand about himself. That he was someone capable of making decisions that used the people closest to him when the alternative was accepting a limitation he did not want to accept. He said, "I don't want to be that person." I said, "Then don't be." He said, "I know." I said, "Daniel, I love you. That's the most inconvenient thing about all of this." He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "I know. I love you too." I said, "Then act like it, starting now. I want to talk to you directly now. Wherever you are. Whatever time it is." Why brother signed my name on a loan document because he was afraid to ask me and because he thought the business would work and because in the specific moral arithmetic he was doing in the moment, the outcome he was trying to achieve outweighed the method he was using to achieve it. That arithmetic was wrong. Not complicated wrong. Just wrong. And I am not going to tell you that I have fully forgiven it or that our relationship is what it was before, because neither of those things is yet true. What I can tell you is that the conversation we had in the coffee shop was more honest than most of the conversations we have had in our adult lives. And honesty, even when it arrives as a consequence of something that should never have happened, is nothing. It is, in fact, the thing that makes a relationship worth continuing to work on rather than simply walking away from. If someone you love has used your name or your identity or your credit without your knowledge, please understand that you have legal options and that those options are real and worth understanding before you decide what to do with them. You do not have to use all of them. I did not use all of mine. But knowing what is available to you is the thing that lets you make a decision rather than having a decision made for you, which is, come to think of it, exactly the thing that should have happened before my name appeared on a signature page. I never be the one who makes the decision. About your name. About your credit. About what your identity is used for and by whom and under what circumstances. That is not a legal statement. That is just the most basic form of being a person who takes their own life seriously. And you deserve to take your own life seriously. That is today's story on the Family Ledger. Leave a comment wherever you are watching from. Tell me what time it is. Tell me whether there is someone in your life you love and also do not quite trust with the things that matter most about your financial standing. I read every single one. Subscribe for the next story every week. Check the description for another one I think you will connect with. Thank you for being here.